Hey guys, how are you all beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is next part of Godlike Hokage in Naruto. The Gura Gura no Mi is known as the strongest fruit in the world of One Piece. In Naruto world, the blood limit would grant the strongest power for those ninjas. But what if the Gura Gura no Mi is found in the world of Naruto and after it is eaten it will be like a blood limit power? Well, the MC just took that fruit. This story begins before the Second Ninja War by 2 years. So let's start without any delay. Kimimaro didn't overthink and immediately stretched his arms out. 10-finger drilling bullets. Boom. 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 In a dark corner, Orochimaru suddenly appeared, then directly got nailed to the ground by Kimimaro's bone bullets, then spit blood. However, Orochimaru didn't seem like he was in pain. Instead, he glanced thoughtfully at Karen and said, "It turns out that, not only does she have a special healing technique, but also a very powerful perception ability, it can fully sense my presence." As soon as he said these sentences, Orochimaru opened his mouth, then came out of it, and all the scars on his body disappeared. Dead bone pulse, ice release, perception, and healing, a perfect team. Looking at the three of them, Orochimaru couldn't help but stick his tongue out and licked his lips. Kimimaro, Haku, and Karen were strong. Even the people Orochimaru has gathered cannot be compared to them. This made Orochimaru always unsatisfied. Especially when it comes to Kimimaro, he was supposed to be a human experiment. Unexpectedly, Naito appeared in the Mist Village, and he had no choice but let go of him. Orochimaru, who was very interested in studying Kimimaro's physical ability and bloodline limits, revealed a creepy look of excitement on his face. He looked at the three as if they weren't people, but more like some kind of experimental subjects. Just a bit of flesh, blood, and chakra will be fine. The dead bone pulse, I finally had the chance, but I have to study it carefully. Putting the creepy tongue back, Orochimaru rushed toward Kimimaro, while his eyes were flashing with excitement. Seeing that, Kimimaro was fearless and continued confronting him. He managed to roughly guess Orochimaru's ability. It was indeed tricky, but with Karen's presence in his team, it won't be impossible to fight back. After all, she could clearly sense Orochimaru. Karen had a very solemn expression. Although she could locate Orochimaru, his ability to manipulate light gave her a headache. After all, she couldn't provide every detail to Kimimaro instantly. He's interfering with vision by manipulating light. In essence, it's not a genjutsu, but a ninjutsu, and a very troublesome one too. On the other side, Haku also watched the battle between Orochimaru and Kimimaro solemnly, but he didn't step forward immediately. He looked at Sakura, and said, "This person is very dangerous, you better hurry up and leave." Well, thank you very much." Sakura didn't expect to be rescued at the last moment. However, she was very grateful, and at this time, she already knew that Haku is one of Naito's men. In this case, this is equivalent to being rescued by Naito twice. However, Sakura was also grateful to Haku, but Sasuke didn't think the same way. He regarded them as enemies, and being saved by them was disgraceful. Damn it. Damn it. They are the ones which he should defeat, how can he accept this? Neither of them seems to be able to move, I will help you. Haku looked at Sasuke, who was barely standing up, and Naruto, who already passed out. His eyes then flickered slightly, and used a hand seal and pressed his hand on the ground. Ice release, Ice Age. Crack. The ice erupted suddenly, then spread along the ground in an instant, turning a great part of the forest of death into ice. Almost all trees were frozen, and suddenly it was winter in July. The ice surface was crystal clear in the sunlight. If you look at it from the sky, the forest seems to be transformed into fine art. The green leaves that were covered by ice layers gave the forest a mysterious atmosphere. However, all the ninjas in this area got horrified the moment they saw that. Damn, what power is this? The whole forest turned into ice. Quick, run away. The ninjas quickly reacted and fled to the distance, and didn't dare to go in the direction where the ice spread. At this time, Haku was still maintaining his hand sign and pressing the ground with his other hand, then suddenly snorted. Buzz! In an instant, an ice layer rose up under Sakura, Sasuke, and Naruto. And in the exclamation of Sakura, the three instantly slid along the ice to the distance. In a matter of moments, the three crossed a lot of distance and finally reached the edge of the ice and eventually stopped. This is... Sakura stood up and looked at the back incredulously, and could no longer know the distance she has crossed in these seconds, that is to say, in an instant, Haku managed to completely freeze a vast range. This power is shocking. Sasuke, who has initially thought of defeating Kimimaro and Haku, looked at the back in disbelief. At a glance, the forest behind has completely transformed into a world of ice and snow. That guy, how come, he's so strong? After gritting his teeth in disbelief, Sasuke finally fell helplessly on Naruto, then passed out too. After sending Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura away, Haku stood up and walked to Karin's side, staring at Orochimaru. Karin was already analyzing Orochimaru's ability, but so was Haku. However, compared to him, Karin's ability to analyze was stronger, or to be more precise, she's the most suitable person to command. Haku, trap him with your demonic mirroring ice crystals. Yes. Hearing Karin's solemn tone, Haku nodded, used a hand sign, then joined the battle. Under normal circumstances, Haku and Karin wouldn't intervene in Kimimaro's battles. But in this situation, it was difficult for Kimimaro to deal with this light controlling jutsu on his own. Moreover, Orochimaru himself is very strong. If he was only controlling light, it wouldn't matter, but Orochimaru himself is creating various clones of himself, which can be troublesome. Even if they can tell the difference between the true one or the clone, Orochimaru needed only a moment of hesitation to finish them. Ice release, demonic mirroring ice crystals. Haku is much stronger today than when he was in the original, so as his mirrors, they are now extremely huge and have more numbers. Almost instantly, within a range of tens of meters around, mirrors appeared all over the place. Kimimaro, Haku, a large-scale attack formation. Seeing this, Karin took a breath, then released her power. Adamantine sealing chains. Whoosh! Numerous sealing chains burst out directly out of her body, and they were one of the most iconic seals of the Uzumaki clan. It's also extremely powerful, and it can even suppress the Kyuubi for a short time. These chains spread out in an instant, and Orochimaru, who had limited movement options because of the ice mirrors, was finally wrapped in these chains. This technique. Looking at the chain crushing his body, and hearing the words Karin has shouted, Orochimaru squinted and screamed in pain. However, no matter how loudly he screamed, two strong other screams emitted on the battlefield. Vengeful strike. The Bracken dance. Ice release. 1,000 kill blasts. Crack. In an instant, the ice on the ground exploded completely, while countless bones pierced the ground and the layers of ice. In an instant, nearly 100 meters of the woods turned into a forest of bones. At the same time, the ice gathered around and condensed, then exploded and started bombarding the forest, making various cracking sounds. It was like a flower of ice and bones, blooming in the forest of death, both beautiful and horrifying. It's over. The bones on Kimimro's body withdrew inside his body, then he landed to Karen's side. Haku also walked to them, while his eyes were flashing with the reflections of the light on the ice. It's not over yet. After taking a deep breath, Karen showed a terrifying look in her eyes and said, "I can still feel his chakra around. This guy's vitality is really terrible." Hearing this sentence, Kimimro immediately frowned slightly, and then said with a cold tone, "If he's not dead, then we will make sure to kill him next time. The same trick won't work twice on me." A snake swam out among the rumbles of the ice and bones, and then suddenly opened its mouth, and Orochimaru came out of it all sticky. Even though he looked extremely calm and relaxed, he was, in fact, very dignified deep inside. Although Kimimro and Haku consumed a lot of their chakra, he also used a lot of his chakra. Even without the Mangekyo Sharingan, Orochimaru is ranked at the peak of the Kage level. However, the Mangekyo Sharingan didn't actually help him break through to the Super Kage level, but it helped to strengthen him a little. The three are close to the peak of the Kage level rank. However, when they team up together, it can be said that they are comparable to Orochimaru's strength. It's just that the blast of their movement is so strong. The blast wave of a Kage-level shinobi can easily destroy the entire forest of death. There's no way that the examiners didn't notice them. There's no time, Konoha's Jonin should be on their way, I must get their blood and chakra before that. Looking at Kimimro, Haku, and Karen, that evil look from before faded away, and it was replaced by a serious and solemn look. However, just when the four of them were about to go for a second round, they suddenly stopped at the same time. The distance between the four is only a few meters. At this moment, the icy ground between Orochimaru and Kimimro started cracking. Crack! Crack! The moment this fragmentation appeared, it began to spread to the surrounding. The pace was very fast, and directly reached both sides where Orochimaru and Kimimro were standing. At the same time, it spread around the frozen trees, and to the huge bones created by Kimimro. Just in a few moments, dense cracks appeared on all the ice and the bones around the place. Time seemed to stagnate as Orochimaru and the other had already stopped moving. Crack! Suddenly a sound similar to glass breaking emitted from all directions. The ice in the entire forest and even the big bones all collapsed in an instant. The ice got shattered, and green leaves and trees finally were freed from it without any damage. It seemed as if this frozen forest has returned to its original state in an instant. The ice and the bones were completely turned into powder as if they didn't appear in the first place. Looking at this scene, Kimimro didn't seem shocked, but showed a respectful expression and bowed to the figure that appeared silently. "Naito-sama. The only person that can instantly freeze is Haku. And the only person who can wipe all of that as if it didn't happen is none but Naito. So far, you've done a good job." Naito nodded softly at the three. They managed to stand their ground against Orochimaru, and they even took a little advantage. Naito was quite satisfied. Moreover, in Naito's view, if they've continued to fight, the advantage of having Karen in the team would have shown up. Her healing and sensing ability would have kept them sharper than Orochimaru, and he would have likely lost in the end. However, Orochimaru's movement was a bit big. If they continued to play, the exam would have ended up being cancelled. You really put high standards, you Naito, this performance is just good. Looking at Naito, who appeared in the field, Orochimaru wasn't particularly surprised, but he instantly converged all of that momentum took a deep breath, then said, "In my opinion, it's already unexpectedly perfect performance." The words of Orochimaru didn't give the three any special expressions. For them, Orochimaru's evaluation doesn't matter, and won't be as good as hearing Naito evaluating them by "good job." After hearing that, Naito looked at Orochimaru seriously and nodded, then walked toward Orochimaru and, at the same time, said, "Well, this is just good. As for perfection, unexpected perfection should look this way." As soon as he said these words, Naito waved his fist at Orochimaru, who wanted to scream badly. Although there was still a long distance between the two, when he saw Naito waving his fist at him, Orochimaru looked horrified. Orochimaru didn't even have time to think, he spat blood directly, then the whole person flew to the sky like a falling meteor and disappeared. It turned out that even he can be bullied. It's indeed unexpected perfection. I always wanted to punch him. Looking at Orochimaru, who was blown away by his fist to God know where, Naito retracted his fist, then shook his head angrily. Naito originally wanted to punch him when he saw how Orochimaru bullied Sasuke and Naruto, but he held back. As a result, Orochimaru even dared to fight Kimimaro and the other two to take some of their blood. He really deserved it. Even if they can tell the difference between the true one or the clone, Orochimaru needed only a moment of hesitation to finish them. Watching Orochimaru being whipped by Naito's punch didn't surprise Kimimaro and Haku. On the side, Karen was somewhat elated, and she seemed very excited about Naito punching Orochimaru. Sure enough, HolyOniiSama is the most powerful, and he defeated that disgusting snake with one punch. Thinking so in her heart, Karen revealed her nympho side and stuck her tongue out, but suddenly she sensed that many ninjas were approaching and finally came back to her senses. Whoosh! The first person who rushed over was naturally Anko. She looked at the field, but she couldn't find Orochimaru. Pursing her lips, she walked to Naito. HolyOniiSama, Orochimaru. She knew about Orochimaru's defection and crimes, so he had no respect for him anymore. Naito reached out and patted Anko's shoulder gently, saying, "He's no longer here." Unusually of her, Anko stood there quietly. Naito knew exactly what is going on. Anko knew about Orochimaru's experiments, and if it wasn't for Naito, she would have ended up being one of them. Thus, as a survivor, Anko felt responsible for trying to stop Orochimaru the same as the original. However, Orochimaru didn't miss up with her memories, and she knows about strong she is. She's ambitious, and she's way stronger than the original. After patting her little head, Naito turned to look at Kimimaro, Haku, and Karen, then he said, "The second test will continue, you need to go." "Yes. HolyOniiSama." The three answered, then turned away. Immediately after they left, two Anbu and a number of the examiners quickly came here. At first sight, they noticed Naito and saluted him. HolyOniiSama. The awe was evident in everyone's eyes. Although Naito has been away for a long time, and even though he was the Rain Village leader, his name was still awe-inspiring in Konoha. Naito glanced at the Anbu, and the examiners then looked at Anko, who was bowing her head. Noticing the arrival of the Anbu and the examiners, Anko calmed down, raised her head, and said with a deep voice, "HolyOniiSama has solved the problem. Let's leave. The exam will continue." Since Naito has said that Orochimaru is no longer here, then it should be the truth, and there's no need for a patrol or a search. Hearing this, the Anbu looked at each other, then nodded and disappeared in the smoke. As for the examiners, after they heard Anko's words, they naturally didn't dare to stay. Anko herself was horrifying, not to mention Naito next to her. Watching everyone retreating, Anko turned to look at Naito, and said with a smile, "Naito-sama, do you want to continue to watch the Chunin exam with me?" Looking at her grinning again, Naito couldn't help but smile and nod casually. "So, how about we head to the tower, where we can see more clearly?" Anko grinned and pulled Naito's arm with a smile, acting like a child. "Let's go." Naito responded with a smile, but suddenly showed a trace of surprise, and turned to look in a certain direction. Anko saw Naito's sudden movements and looked in the same direction, but she couldn't see anything unusual. Anko looked more puzzled, and when she turned to look at Naito, she found out that the latter had already disappeared. Naito-sama. Deep into the forest of the death. At the center of the forest, there was a big tower, with multiple entrances and exits in all directions. Kimimaro and his party happened to be there too. Kimimaro and his teammates were approaching carefully, while on the other sides of the tower, 3 teams were approaching, but one particular team was a bit farther away. It was Hinata's squad. Shortly after they entered the forest, Hinata, Shino, and Kiba encountered another team. Although Hinata was soft and gentle, her strength was unquestionable, and she, with the help of her friends, easily got the scrolls they needed. At this time, Hinata and her teammates found 2 other teams in the distance. Although Hinata was the strongest, she wasn't the team captain because of her weak personality. So following Kiba's commands, the party rushed toward the 2 teams. The 2 teams in front were from the Sand Village, and the other from the Waterfall Village. "It's the Sand's brats. You met us first, how unlucky." The genin from the Waterfall Village looked at each other with a cold expression. On the other side, Kankuro ignored them, then looked at Gura next to him, saying, "Oi, Gura, you know how this is work, right? If we have the same scroll, then this battle will be meaningless." "So what?" Gura looked coldly at the Waterfall Village genin. "And with murderous intent," he said, "everyone that encounters us must die." Hearing Gura, Kankuro's forehead gradually showed traces of cold sweats, then he simply turned to look at them and said, "It's really unlucky for you to encounter us guys." The genin from the Waterfall Village noticed how they were being ignored by Gura and the other and became furious and immediately pulled out their weapons and rushed at them. It was at the same moment that Hinata and her team came. Seeing this outrageous battle, Kiba showed an interesting expression, saying, "They are already fighting. So who do you think will win, the Sand team? That little red-headed guy doesn't look very strong." However, almost at the same moment, Kiba's voice fell. Gura stretched out his hand. Whoosh! In an instant, the sand surged, directly grabbing the Waterfall Village genin by the leg, forcing them to stop. The sand then wrapped their entire bodies in the blink of an eye before they could even react. Sand binding coffin. The murderous intent was evident in Gura's eyes as he clenched his hand tightly. The sand wrapping them gradually shrank and squeezed them hard inside. Boom! Watching this scene, Kiba was so scared that he almost fell off the tree. He felt chills on the back of his neck, and the sweat started falling off his forehead. "What is this? I think we should go." Shino, on the side, was still calm and said seriously, "It seems that it's too late." Hinata, standing on the right, responded weakly, as she was watching the sand sweeping directly toward them. "No good." Kiba was horrified. He has just seen the Waterfall genin directly getting crushed by this sand. He didn't dare to fight back or block that sand, so he immediately backed away. However, the sand condensed, and like a wave, it covered the 3 of them underneath it. Far away. "It's the scroll that we need, Lucky. It's all done." Oi, Gaara, we can go. After holding the scroll, Kankuro saw how Gaara attacked Hinata and the others, and he tried to stop him. Shut up! Gaara responded, with evident killing intent in his eyes, saying, I'm not satisfied yet. This is not enough. I want to kill them all. Looking at the waves of sand falling at the front, a trace of cold sweat appeared on Kankuro's forehead and said, forget it, Gaara. We already got the scrolls we need, we won't get any good from killing them. After all, it's Konoha. Kankuro said, trying to convince him, but when he saw how the sand didn't stop from falling, he could only sigh helplessly. These Konoha genin must be really unfortunate for running at them. After shaking his head, Kankuro prepared to turn away. Suddenly, Kankuro, Tumrai, and Gaara, on the side, simultaneously looked stunned. Boom! 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 Almost at the moment when the sand wave fell, a series of explosion sounds emitted, then the terrifying sand wave burst all around. Phew! Thank you, Hinata. Kiba wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, then thanked Hinata for saving his life. Hinata didn't have time to respond to Kiba, as she showed a very serious and solemn expression while looking at Gaara, who jumped close toward them. I didn't imagine that there's such a strong shinobi in Konoha. Gaara looked strangely at them, he totally didn't expect that they would be able to stop his sand wave, and it was none but the weak one in the middle. Looking at Hinata, he suddenly revealed his killing intent. Well, this is better, now I can finally feel satisfied. At the moment when Gaara's voice fell, the sand surged and swept toward Hinata. Hinata took a deep breath. Although she was a little scared recalling the scene, in which Gaara crushed those poor souls to death, her expression was more serious when she thought of her teammates' safety. Kiba, Shino, you go first. Hinata, who has always been weak, quickly made such a decision, which made both Kiba and Shino surprised. Apart from that moment, they dismissed the distraction they felt, and as they started falling back, they noticed Tumrai and Kankuro on the other side. Even if Hinata managed to block Gaara, they wouldn't let her just escape. Roar! In the face of Gaara's attack, Hinata whispered softly, then her hands flew up and down like a butterfly. Compared to the rigid punches of Lee, the movements of Hinata are undoubtedly beautiful. Every time Hinata waved her small hand, powerful chakra burst out of her palm, bursting a mass amount of the sand directly. This move is actually related to the gentle fist technique, but with Naito's training, it became more powerful. Although it can't be compared to Kaguya's 80 Gods vacuum attack, it started to take the same shape. This girl. Seeing his sand scattered by Hinata easily, Gaara couldn't help but look shocked. At this time, he could clearly feel her powerful chakra. It was really incredible. Such a chakra, he would have never expected to belong to a weak girl like her. 8 trigrams 64 palms. Buzz. Hinata waved her hands fast, and struck rapidly, repelling the sand, and destroying it completely, and under the shocked gazes of Gaara, he got directly hit by a few strikes and flew out. Hinata obviously had the upper hand, but she didn't chase after victory and stopped hesitantly. Shit. Damn. Gaara struggled slightly to stand up again, and the sand armor on his body is completely cracked. And even though the sand protected him, and he didn't have any severe injuries, he trembled and felt dizzy. Hinata, who thought she might have directly killed Gaara, was also a little surprised. She didn't expect him to have a layer of sand as armor on his body. However, compared to her surprise, Gaara was feeling shocked. The feeling of being hit by Hinata was very bad, and it had even reminded him of that scene a few days ago, on Konoha's street, when he got wounded by Kimimro's bones and frozen by Haku's ice. "You will die now," he shouted as the blood started flowing on the side of his forehead, covering his eye. Then he suddenly pressed his hands on the ground. Quicksand waterfall flow. Bang! The ground started trembling, and the mud and rocks shattered, turning into sand. Then a colossal wave took form. Kiba and Shino, who were about to engage, saw this scene and couldn't help but feel horrified again. They immediately retreated and jumped to the nearby trees. Hinata in the center didn't try to hide, because the attack was directed at her, and jumping to the trees won't protect her, and it will endanger her friends. Moreover, all she was thinking of is, it seems, that it's not particularly strong. Looking at the sand surging like an unstoppable sea, Hinata gently took her fight stance. 8 trigrams palms revolving heaven. Buzz. With a quick spin, Hinata created an absolute defense instantly and blocked all the sand easily. Moreover, because of the huge amount of chakra that Hinata has, the range of her technique was extremely large, almost covering the radius of several meters. However, it wasn't over. This technique can be taught only by a patriarch to another patriarch. Even though Naito could easily pass it. However, he didn't stop there and also helped her improve it. The idea was to allow Hinata to change from a purely defensive move to a technique that can be used in offensive situations and also grant her protection. When chakra gathered to a certain extent, Hinata suddenly changed the speed of rotation. All of the chakra channeled into her hands. Instead of dissipating the chakra after finishing the technique, it was all gathered in Hinata's hands. This is what Naito tried to improve. Strike. Boom. Using the chakra she gathered, this single strike was stronger than any of her other techniques, and it quickly swept through the sand falls and rushed toward Gura. However, it wasn't taking the shape of a palm, but a converged bright white light sphere that kept spinning as it flew toward its target. Buzz. On the way, it was making buzzing sounds due to the continuous rotation, and at the same time, seemed like it was changing its shape. The center of the rotation gradually raised, becoming extremely sharp, then the sound changed from buzzing to sharp hissing. And as it kept flying, it turned into a spear that seemed extremely scary because it looked like it could penetrate everything. There's no doubt that with Naito's improvements and the second stage of the Sage Mode transformation, coupled with her massive chakra volume, this technique was an S-class ninjutsu or higher. Only such a rank would satisfy Naito. As the rotation became sharper, the speed became faster and kept penetrating the endless sand that Gura was using to stop it. Damn! Seeing how it was too late now, avoid it. Gura's face became dark, then the sand stopped flowing and quickly gathered in front of him. This time, the sand didn't only converge, but also compressed, and hardened more than steel. Suddenly a colossal monster with a big belly appeared in front of Gura. The strongest absolute defense. Shield of Shukaku. Gura has ended up using this technique. It's unbelievable. This girl from Konoha was so strong. But this is the end. Kankuro looked at this scene, took a deep breath, and said, "No one can break Gura's absolute defense." At the next moment, Hinata's chakra spinning spear finally hit the shield of Shukaku. Bang! A trembling roar emitted as the sand was wildly bursting, but suddenly the rotation speed of the spear decreased, and its speed slowed down. Kankuro and Tamrai, standing in the distance, were calm at first, then Tamrai's expression gradually changed, showing a trace of horror. No way. Tumrai, who was the best at wind release, knew what was gonna happen next. The spear didn't stop rotating, it was actually strong enough to make the entire monster rotate, and due to the massive amount of chakra used to create him, he actually twisted. Then instantly, cracks started appearing on the back of the shield. Suddenly a hole appeared and expanded, then the chakra spear burst out of it, completely penetrating Gaara's strongest shield. This is impossible. When he saw his strongest shield break forcefully, Gaara looked horrified. Gaara barely avoided it sideways, and the chakra spear directly hit his shoulder. Then finally penetrated the tree behind him and dispersed. The injury wasn't that bad since his sand armor barely counteracted a little of its attack power too. However, silence controlled the place. Tumrai and Kankuro looked stunned. The blood kept flowing out of his shoulder and dripping on the sand below. He has never been injured, he never has seen his blood until he arrived at Konoha. First, it was Kimimaro, then now it's Hinata, and this injury is more serious than last time. Even Kankuro and Tumrai couldn't believe this. It seems that this exam is full of crazy powerful people. Off. Kankuro looked at the side again to find Gaara standing again with a touch of madness in his eyes. This is horrible, that monster is coming out. Gaara was injured again. Because of the severe injury he suffered, coupled with the fact that he couldn't accept that the strongest defense was defeated, the power of the Ichibi finally got out of control. He didn't use the sleeping technique, nor was he in control of that power. In an instant, the Ichibi completely took control of his consciousness. Ora! A mad roar echoed in the field, and from the hole in Gaara's shoulder, a weird strong chakra rushed out, then in an instant, it turned into a huge yellowish arm. Suddenly that arm grabbed Gaara until he could no longer be seen. Almost in a blink of an eye, the Ichibi's colossal body appeared in the forest of death. Konoha Shinobi, who was monitoring the exam, saw this scene, and all showed horrified colors. No. That, isn't it a Baijua? Why did it appear in the Chunin exam? Everyone looked shocked, even the Anbu in charge of the overall situation seemed terrified. First, the forest was instantly frozen, then horrible huge bones spurted out. Then the ice and bones were all shattered into powder, and now the Ichibi suddenly appeared in the middle of the forest. This is no longer a Chunin exam, this is a Shinobi war. In the forest of death. Looking at this huge beast before her, Hinata looked shocked. This is. With her Bakugan, she could clearly see the chakra contained inside the Ichibi's body. It's simply extremely huge. Although it's far inferior to Naito, it's way stronger than her. The amount of chakra is incomparable to her. Maybe if she finished the third stage, then she would at least have a chance. Mwahaha. I've finally come out. After he roared to the sky, Ichibi finally laughed creepily as always. This raccoon's life has always been sad. He was always sealed, and whenever he finally gets out, he will find Naito right in front of him and beats him again. And after getting beaten, he will wake up to find that he was sealed again. That bastard isn't here this time. Thinking of Naito, Ichibi shuddered deep inside, his small eyes twitched, then he glanced at the forest, and saw Hinata and the others. Okay. Naito can't just appear every time because that's so unlucky. This time it's gonna be easy. Thinking about this, Ichibi gave another burst of laughter, and then raised his huge claws, aiming at Hinata and the others. Hinata, who saw this, was shocked and terrified. After all, the huge size of this beast, coupled with his terrifying amount of chakra, is much worse than dealing with Gaara. Just looking at him makes her feel scared. Kankuro, Tumrai, Kiba, and Shino were scared and stood there stiffly, unable to move. Looking at Ichibi lifting his paws, Hinata froze in her place and didn't know what to do, revealing a scared, weak expression. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Time passed little by little, but the Ichibi claws didn't fall. Instead, they stopped midair and remained motionless. At this time, even Hinata, who was almost scared to tears, felt that something was strange, and she used her 360-degree vision. And she suddenly saw someone whom she didn't know when he appeared. "Don't be afraid." That voice made the tears disappear instantly from her eyes, then she turned with a cute expression. Naito-sensei." Hinata was still afraid, though, and she immediately hid behind Naito's back and pulled his sleeves. Naito didn't do anything and stared coldly at the Ichibi. Kiba, Shino, and the others all saw Naito, which made them surprised. "Naito-sama." The two saw Naito before, but they didn't know who he was. When they asked Hinata, she didn't tell them, but they were there when Kabuto shared his shocking story. Seeing Naito there, both of them were relieved, but also somewhat worried. Although Naito is the strongest shinobi, he's only human. That thing in front of them is a monster. Even Naito-sama can win, the fight might be so big that they will end up getting hurt. Compared to Shino and Kibra, Kankuro and Tumrai didn't know Naito. His sudden appearance certainly surprised them, but they didn't think that such a young guy could defeat the Ichibi. However, they couldn't understand why Ichibi stopped his attack. Is it because he was charging his attack? In fact, if the Ichibi had a human form, he would have had the same expression as Hinata before, he would have even cried more miserable. God! Why? Why do you have to be so cruel to this Tanuki? Why does he end up seeing the person that he least wants to see every time he comes out? Naito simply stood there, but he looked as if he was a giant in front of that cute little Tanuki. "We've met again, Ichibi." Looking indifferently at the huge fat Tanuki, then he grinned, saying, "You need to pay more attention next time when you come out, you're scaring people." Naito said casually, and at the same time reached out to Hinata's head, patted it, and said to the Ichibi, "Look, you've scared her, you know what you need to do now, right?" These few words of Naito made Kiba and Shino look shocked. Kankuro and Tumrai, on the other side, also froze for a moment, then looked at Naito with a dull expression. "This man, he's retarded, isn't he?" Tumrai and Kankuro stood there waiting for the inevitable death of this arrogant white-haired boy. Those claws will definitely crush him at any moment. However, they never fall. Instead, the Ichibi's expression turned funny, and he kept nodding his head at Naito fearfully. The scene looked funny, but no one dared to laugh. Poof! The smoke suddenly burst, and the Ichibi's huge body disappeared out of thin air. The process of retracting was even faster than the process of his appearance. The silence controlled the field, and the Ichibi was dealt with by him, without even causing any damage. However, deep inside, the sound of the rumbling thunder was echoing in everyone's minds. Kiba looked shocked, and his knees were shivering. Even the calm Shino felt like he was dreaming and couldn't help but widen his eyes. Tumrai couldn't help but rub her eyes, wondering if she was dazzled or daydreaming. While Kankuro's jaw was still opened wide. Is this a joke? At this moment, none of the people present could believe what has just happened. Hinata, who was still hiding behind Naito, pulled his arm. "Naito-sensei, it seemed to be afraid of you." Looking at the Ichibi who hurriedly disappeared, Hinata looked at Naito and asked weakly. Naito looked at Hinata, and patted her head again with a smile, saying, "It seems so. After all, it was beaten by me twice before, and I don't think it was ready for the third time." Rumble. These few words felt like thunder exploding in everyone's ears. Kibara and Kankuro almost fell off the tree. If they didn't actually see it with their own eyes, they would have definitely felt that Naito was talking nonsense. However, watching how the Ichibi turned from being a terrifying monster to a cute little thing and didn't even dare to attack Naito, then hurriedly disappeared, they couldn't help but believe that it was afraid of Naito. All of them at that time were widening their eyes as they were looking at Naito. Okay, the problem has been dealt with, the Chunin exam can be continued now. Naito glanced around, then looked at Hinata and smiled, "Good job." After being praised by Naito, a blush appeared on Hinata's face, then she bowed her head in embarrassment. When she looked up again, Naito's figure had already disappeared. After freezing there for a long time, Kibara and Shinobi finally reacted and came to Hinata's side. However, the two of them didn't know what to say at this time, they looked as if they had lost their ability to speak. As for what they should do next, they didn't have any idea. Hinata wouldn't take the initiative to find trouble, so the three looked at the distance at Kankuro and Tamrai, who looked still stunned, and left and headed toward the center of the tower. After they left, Kankuro and Tamrai finally came back to their senses. Then rushed to find unconscious Gaara. However, they didn't speak a word. In their minds, there was only one question being asked again and again. Who was that white-haired boy? The second test duration was 5 days, and Kimimaro and his team were the first to arrive at the tower, followed by Hinata and her team. However, they were the first a few seconds, then Hinata and the others followed. After fighting Orochimaru, Kimimaro and his team easily found another team, took their scroll, then headed toward the tower. They could arrive faster, but when they saw the Ichibi, Kimimaro was interested in going and fighting him, but it didn't go as he wished, because the Ichibi suddenly disappeared, so they turned around and rushed toward the tower. At the bottom of the tower, Kimimaro saw Hinata, who has walked to the tower almost at the same time, and nodded gently at her. After all, Hinata was a disciple recognized by Naito himself, and in Kimimaro's view, Naito's will is absolute. Even the three of them have not been recognized by Naito as disciples, so his attitude toward Hinata should be nothing but respect. As for Haku, he gently smiled at everyone. Everyone was nice to her, except for Karen, who seemed like she was murmuring a few curses. Karen was a little jealous of her since she was able to get Naito's approval. That's what Karen has ever wanted but never managed to get. HolyOniiSama's team is ridiculously strong. Walking forward, while looking at Kimimaro and the others, Kibara and Shino looked terrified. Hinata didn't know how to respond to the greeting of Kimimaro and the others and shyly looked down. Shortly after the two teams arrived, Gaara and his party finally entered the tower. At that time, Gaara regained consciousness, and the wound on his body disappeared due to the opening of the Ichibi's seal. However, his mood was extremely low, and even traces of fear were evident in his expression. Because when the Ichibi got control, their consciousness swapped, and he was trapped inside. He saw and felt everything clearly. He could feel the Ichibi's fear of Naito, and those feelings spread to Gaara's heart. He had never seen the Ichibi scared, which seemed unbelievable to him. Even his father was afraid of the Ichibi and tried to kill him several times, but now, the Ichibi actually was trembling in front of a human being. Who is that man? When they arrived at the tower, Gaara and the others soon met their team leader Baki. The team leaders waited in the tower and watched what was going on inside the forest from a distance. Baki's most concern was undoubtedly Gaara. When he saw Ichibi's rampage, he was totally shocked, but it suddenly disappeared. Baki also wondered why Gaara was forced to release the Ichibi. He obviously didn't run into Kimimaro and his team, after all, they came from the other side of the forest. After the two met, Gaara immediately asked who Naito was, and Baki asked what happened. It turned out to be this way. Hearing the description of that man, Baki took a deep breath, then with a serious tone and dignified expression, he said, "Gaara, the Ichibi was defeated more than once by that man, that's why he was so afraid." As for who was he? He's the man who beheaded the third Raikage, killed the third Kazekage, the strongest Kazekage of all time, and also destroyed our village. Whatever is the situation and the circumstances, do not provoke that person. Speaking of this, Baki's expression was solemn, and he even seemed scared. Staring at Gaara, he continued, "Gaara, I know what kind of person you are, but never try to fight him. That person has the power to easily wipe out our entire village." These few words made Gaara very quiet. However, he wasn't excited at all, instead, his body was slightly shivering from fear. He is a Jinchuriki, and the emotion of his Baijuo can naturally affect him, coupled with the fear he originally had in his heart, he could barely control his breathing. As for Kankuro and Tamrai, they looked at each other and swallowed. "He can easily destroy the Sand Village." It was this sentence that scared the two of them. They couldn't believe it, but watching Baki's solemn expression, and recalling how that monster was afraid of Naito, this sentence slowly made sense. 5 days passed quickly. During the period, although Sasuke and Naruto were in a coma for a couple of days and caused Sakura a lot of trouble, when they woke up, none of the remaining genin in the forest were their opponents. Basically, all of the powerful shinobi have already passed the exam. So, near the end of the second test, they also obtained the scroll they needed, and entered the tower, to find out that they were the last team. In the hall inside the tower, all of the genin who passed the test were gathered there. Some of them who arrived today looked in an embarrassing state, while those who arrived sooner seemed to be much better, and their mental state was strong. Comparing each other, anyone could see the difference, but the final arrivals are not necessarily the weakest. After all, luck can also be a major aspect of this test. In front of these genin, the elites of the villages, who were mostly Konoha's teachers, were standing there in front of them. The third Hokage has also come to the tower in person. Standing in front of the elites, he looked at the genin, with twinkling eyes. "The number of kids who passed is a little too much. I didn't expect all of our genin to pass, which is very interesting." While murmuring, Sarutobi couldn't help but think of the training that shocked all of the Anbu department. Naito stood alone under the tower and defeated all the candidates. As a result, in that Anbu exam, only Naito has passed. Thinking of this, Sarutobi glanced at Kimimaro and his team in the crowd. If Kimimaro and his friends have done this, they could have stopped everyone from entering the tower, but they didn't do that, and he didn't know whether it was Naito's instructions or their own reasons. In short, this is good, having a lot of people passing the exam, better than only one team. After pondering for a while, he noticed Anko on the side, giving him signs to start speaking. Sarutobi took a puff from his pipe, then he started talking. He briefly explained the purpose of this test, then he called Hayate Gecko to explain the third test. Because too many people passed, they tend to run additional preliminaries to reduce the number of finalists. What is different from the original is that Kabuto didn't pass the second test. It wasn't impossible to pass, but it was meaningless, so he left the forest and chose to give, then went to find Orochimaru, who was punched by Naito and flew somewhere. After he coughed twice, Hyatt announced the beginning of the preliminaries. The two sides in the first matchup are Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Karen. No way. These two names made Sakura exclaim, and felt that Sasuke was really unfortunate to meet one of Kimimro's teammates at the first match. Although she didn't see Karen's actual strength and abilities, it was unlikely that she will turn out to be weak as a group member with strong and outrageous people like Kimimro and Haku. Sasuke, are you sure that you want to fight? Sakura was worried as she hesitantly was about to ask him to simply give up. Shut up! Sasuke directly interrupted her, with a cold stare on his face, then locked his eyes on Karen while walking forward. In the face of Kimimro, he was defeated by a single shot, and in the face of Haku, although they didn't fight yet, the gap is clearly terrifying just by looking at that technique he used to freeze the forest. In the end, there is only Karen left, and he must win. All three can't be so strong. Moreover, Karen is just a woman. How bad can it go? Thinking of this, Sasuke took a deep breath and continued to walk forward. Karen didn't expect that she would be the first one, shrugged casually, then she walked forward while staring at Sasuke and perceiving him. Well, although he's quite handsome, he's still worse than Naito-sama. Okay, the first round will start, except for the contestants, please got to the stands. After Hyatt coughed, everyone walked to the stands. Sarutobi nodded walked first, then the elite, followed by the genin. Speaking of that, Naruto originally wanted to cheer Sasuke, but the last name Uzumaki made him feel weird. Besides, Karen looked weak, he couldn't cheer Sasuke to know her down. Ah, what a pain. Kakashi stood in the stand and looked down at the field with a helpless expression. He didn't stop Sasuke from fighting Karen, because Kakashi knew what kind of person he was. Sasuke won't accept losing, so he could only hope that he will win. However, he didn't feel the odds are on his side, even if she was just a girl. Uchiha Sasuke, did he think he can win against someone who was taught by Naito-sama? Anko leaned on the railing fence while grinning. Since the time Naito stopped the Ichibi, he disappeared and didn't show up again, thus, Anko was feeling a bit lost. But the moment Anko's voice emitted, someone answered from the side, it depends on Karen herself. If she's not serious, maybe Sasuke will have a chance of winning. Anko turned excitedly to find out that Naito was leaning on the fence next to her. Naito appeared out of thin air, and one of the people present noticed him there, even Sarutobi. Naito-sama. Anko reacted instantly, showing a happy expression, and smiling at Naito. Anko's loud voice caught the attention of the people around, and soon, everyone in the place noticed that he was standing next to Anko. Everyone was startled at that moment, including Kakashi and others who knew Naito personally. Naito-sama. Hyatt Bello stood firmly, then respectfully saluted Naito, and said, "You Naito-sama. You can proceed, I just came to see." "Yes, sir." Hyatt nodded, then took a deep breath and looked at Sasuke and Karen again. However, everyone's attention was focused on Naito, and they saluted him one by one, but it wasn't only out of respect, but with awe too. Even the third Hokage, Sarutobi, seemed very surprised by Naito's sudden arrival, and he smiled at him and greeted him. As for Naruto, Sakura, Konoha's other genin, Kankuro, Gaara, and even Tamarai, knew who was Naito by now and looked at Naito with respect and awe. Is that Naito-sama? Lee wasn't there to hear Kaburo's introduction and didn't encounter Naito in the Forest of Death. However, his teacher Guy reminded him to be very respectful to Naito. Yes. Neji stood there, while his eyes had an evident trace of awe in them, and nodded. He had actually seen Naito more than once. After all, he lived in the Hyuga station. Moreover, after seeing Naito for the first time, he learned everything about him from his father. He also deliberately collected information about Naito, so his awe for Naito wasn't any bit weaker than Naruto and others. However, under this awe, there was also a trace of dissatisfaction and jealousy. He was in awe, but he couldn't accept how he chose Hinata over him. He couldn't understand why Naito accepted a weak shinobi like Hinata, why she could become Naito's disciple, while he couldn't. He was the genius of the Hyuga clan. He was eager for Naito's approval and hoped to become Naito's disciple, so he worked harder, but Naito never looked at him and never paid attention to him. So he was very dissatisfied. This time, he felt that it was a very good opportunity for him. He wanted to defeat Hinata here and prove to Naito that he's the one who deserves his recognition. Hinata, you're pathetic. Even if you become Naito-sama's disciple, you're still weak, don't you? While murmuring in his heart, Neji looked at Hinata in the distance, and his eyes showed a bit of fierceness. In the field. Naito-sama, every time I saw him, he looks the most perfect. Seeing Naito actually coming to watch her match, Karen's eyes flashed with excitement. When she looked at Sasuke again, she was more serious and no longer casually looked at him. If Naito didn't come, what he predicted would have happened, and Sasuke could have taken the opportunity and defeated her. After all, Sasuke has awakened his 3-Tomo Sharingan, and it's not weak. Also, Indra's chakra within his body can be a very unstable factor. In the presence of Naito, Karen would never act carelessly. I didn't expect Naito-sama to come, you're really unlucky. Looking at Sasuke in front of her, Karen murmured, she really wanted to have a good time and play with him. Sasuke glanced at Naito leaning on the railing fence, then looked again at Karen, then with a kunai in his hand, he looked at her seriously. Although you are a woman, I will fight seriously, so be prepared. 0 chance. Sitting on the top while leaning on the fence, Naito smirked the moment he heard Sasuke's words and gave him 0 chance. Karen heard these words too, and she felt annoyed. Humph. But Karen kept her calm expression and stood there relaxed. Hyatt looked at them, then announced the start of the first round. Whoosh. From the very beginning, Sasuke rushed at Karen. Although he said she was a woman, and she shouldn't be strong. Karen was still the teammate of Kimimaro and Haku, so he won't give her any chance, and chose to strike first. The Sharingan was also activated. In terms of body techniques, he can even see through Kakashi's movements with these eyes. Facing Sasuke's attack, Karen shook her head, so she casually stretched out her hand and tried to grab his wrist. Humph. You think you can stop my attack with such a move? Sasuke snorted since he could see through her move, and responded by spinning his body in the air and swiping with his kunai before she could even finish her move. However, the odds suddenly changed. Whoosh! A strange chain suddenly emerged out of her palm. This was the adamantine chakra chain technique, which is a special sealing technique characteristic of the Uzumaki clan. This time, it was clearly beyond Sasuke's expectations. What is this? With a look of surprise, Sasuke stared cluelessly at the chains, but he knew that she shouldn't get caught by it, and with his flexible moves and his eye's ability to read the movement's motion, he avoided all of her attempts on catching him with these chains. However, Karen forced him to step back, and he failed to rush at her. It turned out that her ability is these chains. Looking at the chain waving gently in front of Karen, Sasuke's eyes flickered, revealing a cold look. Even if these chains are strong, as long as he has the Sharingan, it won't touch him. The three tomo in his eyes slowly circled, then Sasuke once again rushed at Karen. Since he was prepared, he easily avoided the chains and rushed at her. However, when he got closer, Karen smirked. Whoosh! Instantly, countless chains emerged out of her body, and swept across the field, making Sasuke feel like he was inside a storm. What? It wasn't only Sasuke, everyone in the field looked shocked. The adamantine chakra chains technique, and at this age, she seems to be even stronger than Kushina's talent. Sarutobi murmured in his heart, and when he thought of Kushina, he felt a bit bitter deep inside. He even unconsciously glanced at Naito on the side. Boom! 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 The chain kept waving in the faces of the audience, shattering the ground and bombarding it, while Sasuke was hiding in disbelief. Even though he could see through the movements of the chains, his body wasn't fast enough to just avoid all of them. After being forced to retreat, Sasuke, who couldn't avoid all of the attacks, got caught by one of the chains and directly got wrapped tightly. However, just when everyone thought that Sasuke was going to lose, Sasuke suddenly turned into smoke and disappeared. This is an avatar. Suddenly he showed up behind Karen while waving his fist. I won. Sasuke smirked as that thought flashed through his mind, while his fist was about to fall on Karen. However, that smile got wiped quickly. Because Karen suddenly turned around and looked at him calmly. You think that your Sharingan makes you see through my movements, but in fact, your movements are all in my perception. In the face of Sasuke's punch, Karen's clenched her fist and greeted him with 1-2. Seeing this scene, Sasuke was shocked and looked even stunned. Does she think she's stronger? When he saw how Karen turned around, he thought she would attack him with one of her chains. He didn't expect her to punch him back. How much power can a girl have? Sasuke didn't try to dodge or change his moves. Karen could also see through his movements, so any extra action will be meaningless. He only needed to win with strength. Instantly the two fists collided. The moment the two fists connected, Sasuke knew that it was a poor decision as he could feel her brutal force. Almost instantly, his arm made a cracking sound, and twisted to a terrible level. The bones broke, and found himself flying like a bullet to the rear stands. No good. Seeing this scene, Kakashi in the stands shouted loudly, then flashed to Sasuke's sides and caught him. But even so, the two got still slammed into the wall by Karen's power. The entire wall cracked and almost collapsed. The field became silent. Obviously, everyone was shocked by Karen's power. Naruto didn't have time to worry about Sasuke. He was opening his mouth wide. While being shocked to the extreme, he couldn't help but look at Sakura on his side. Uzumaki Karen is more terrifying than Sakura. That punch is horrifying. Is this? Walking out of the ruins, while carrying Sasuke, Kakashi looked at Karen in the field solemnly. Sarutobi standing in the middle of the stands, couldn't help but sigh. I didn't imagine that one day I would see someone else as strong as Tsunade. Why is she so strong? Why I can't beat anyone? Sasuke gritted his teeth, looking at Karen in the distance, then finally passed out. His battle with Karen was the same as the one with Kimimaro and Orochimaru. He got crushed in every single one of them. His Sharingan that he was so proud of couldn't help him win against Karen's brutal power and perception ability. In the first round, the winner is Uzumaki Karen. Hyatt walked over, and after he coughed, he announced the victorious, and at the same time, looked at Karen with surprise. She's really strong. Even as an examiner, he wasn't confident that he could win against her. The people under Master Naito are all insanely powerful. Naito wasn't surprised by Sasuke's defeat, but how Karen won the fight did a bit. After he was stunned for a moment, he couldn't help but laugh. This seems to be his style. Moreover, in the original, Karen was stabbed by Sasuke mercilessly. It seemed at the time like an act of proper revenge. In fact, Sasuke wouldn't have won against her even if she didn't use her brutal strength. After Karen, it was Kimimaro's time, and his opponent was Shino, but the latter decisively confessed his defeat directly, then Haku and a sound Shinobi, who was defeated in a mere second with his ice release. As in the original, Sakura met Ino. It ended up with a tie. Afterward, Tenten and Tamrai stepped forward. Looking at Tenten's clothes, Naito felt nostalgic. Those memories were for a really long time, so long that he almost can't remember. The battle between the two girls was completely one-sided. After all, Tamrai's wind release was almost the perfect counter against Tenten's ninja throwing techniques. When she ran out of weapons, Tenten didn't give up, held the last kunai, and rushed toward Tamrai for a close fight. Tamrai was so lazy to give her that and waved her fan directly. Whoosh! The wind roared like a storm and made the weapons on the ground fly to the sky then fall on Tenten. Whoops! Looking at this scene, a trace of despair appeared on Tenten's expression. The consequence of getting hit by all these weapons is already predictable. That's enough. Sitting at the top, and watching quietly, Naito looked at these weapons, while shaking his head, then he waved his hand casually. Silence. Just when those weapons were about to fall, suddenly, all of them froze in the air. After waiting for a while, Tenten opened her eyes with a strange look on her face to find that these weapons were still suspended in the air and didn't move at all. Puff! Suddenly, all the weapons turned into powder and scattered on the ground. This move has obviously made everyone shocked. Countless people looked at Naito in amazement, and even Anko on the side was widening her eyes. Naito is very kind to the point that he doesn't want to see anyone hurt. Not a chance. Naito's old nickname was Ashura, the god of war. He wasn't named after him, because of the people he rescued, but because of the people he killed with his bloody hand. Without a doubt, there isn't any shinobi in this world that killed more people than Naito. If he saved Kimimaro, his teammates, or Hinata, it would be normal. But Tenten. No one had ever heard of her, and she had nothing to do with Naito. Even Tenten was stunned. Although she couldn't understand what was going on, everyone's eyes were locked on Naito. And she guessed that he was the one who saved her life. Lord Naito, did he just save my life? The 5th round is over, Tamrai wins. Naito didn't show any emotions, nor did he want to explain. Yes. Although he announced the result, instead of the examiner, Hyatt naturally didn't mind and nodded in reverence. Until she returned, Tenten looked stunned. Lee and Neji hurried toward her with a look of surprise, then the latter whispered. Tenten, do you know Naito-sama? She shook her head silently, then looked at Naito in the distance. While she couldn't understand why he helped her, she never met him before. Naito sat down on the fence and looked down on the field. However, if someone pays more attention, he will notice that Naito was really sitting on the fence, but slightly suspended in the air. There was a slight distance. Naito, looking down, was pondering, with a blank expression, almost unemotional, and with evident confusion in his eyes. He suddenly looked a bit emotional. This turned out to be the case. It has always been this way, although he was forcing himself to feel like he belongs to this world, he never fully integrated into it after all. And just at the moment when he rescued Tenten, he suddenly realized how he can belong, and what kind of relationship he got with his world. He can just be him and sit here. There's no illusion and reality, he doesn't need to be integrated. He doesn't need to care about the plot, he just needs to be himself and do everything he wants to do. At this moment, the final part of the spiritual fusion of the Tensogun that he absorbed was finished, and it completely merged with Naito's soul, pushing it to a higher level. This is the last transformation. Feeling his soul transforming, Naito muttered. This transformation was completely different from the previous one. The last one made Naito's soul step into the 6 paths level, possessing immortality and giving him the ability to travel between the Shinobi world and the in-between, and essentially transcending mortals. But this time, the transformation let Naito's soul move toward a higher level. It seems that when it's finally completed, his soul will be equal to this world. The only person who would be on par with him is Otsutsuki Kaguya. If she didn't give birth to her 2 sons, Hagoromo and Homura, with the ability to seal her, she would have been able to control the entire world as its god. She would have used the infinite Tsukuyomi and controlled almost every life under it. The soul gradually transformed, and Naito could finally perceive what was previously undetectable, that is, the will of Kaguya that has scattered throughout the Shinobi world. The chakra itself belongs to her, and if it wasn't for Hagoromo, no one would have obtained it. But these chakras inside everyone actually contained her subtle will. Black Zetsu's plan to use the infinite Tsukuyomi and absorb everyone's chakra, wasn't just so she could get back what belongs to her, but also to bring Kaguya's will together. Kaguya is an immortal existence, and the only reason she can't enter the in-between like Hagoromo is that her power and will are scattered in the world. There is part of her will in the moon, as well as inside the Juubi. Black Zetsu is also a part, and what is left was scattered between all the Shinobi in the world. Even Naito's chakra is no exception. However, as his soul gradually moved toward the final transformation, Naito could perceive it in him, and sense her will that didn't belong to him. Humph! Naito snorted, and gave it a light shock. He wanted to expel it out of his body, while using his will to forcibly wipe Kaguya's. It's a pity that Naito's soul was still transforming, and has not yet reached the final step, thus, he didn't reach Kaguya's level. Therefore, even though it was possible to expel Kaguya's will, it was still difficult. Why Kaguya cannot die, why she can only be sealed, but not killed, Naito finally understood everything at that moment. It's because of Kaguya's will that no one can wipe it out, even the 6 paths himself couldn't get rid of it, and could only helplessly divide it. Although Hagoromo sealed Kaguya's body and replaced her chakra with the Juubi, which he also divided into 9-tailed beasts, these were only her physical strength. Still, in terms of soul and will, he couldn't do anything about them. No one can reach Kaguya's level in terms of soul and will, so no one can wipe it. This is why Kaguya is immortal. But in fact, there is no real immortality. Naito has finally understood what is going on. No one can kill her because no one is on her level. The moment he completes the final stage of the transformation, he will stand on par with Kaguya, and she will no longer be immortal. At this moment, Kaguya's will seemed to consider Naito as a threat, and it felt like it wanted to kill Naito. While he still didn't complete the transformation, it was weak because it was still divided. However, Naito could still feel her will free and converging every second, trying to gather up every shinobi chakra, but it is difficult to do so. Without the infinite Tsukuyomi, the progress was very slow. Naito didn't stop it, nor did he entangle with Kaguya's scattered will, because there is no need to stop it. Naito knew clearly that Kaguya's resurrection before he completes the final stage of the transformation is absolutely impossible. And what if she gets resurrected after he finally completes the transformation? Everything will be over by then. Just after Naito's soul began to transform, he understood the reason behind Kaguya's immortality along with many other things, and finally came back to his senses to watch the 7th round. In the 6th round, Naito didn't pay attention to the fight at all, but it seemed that Naruto was fighting Kiba. However, the 7th round made him smirk. The 7th round, Hyuga Hinata vs Hyuga Neji. After seeing the draw in the 7th round, Hyatt showed a little bit of different expression, and all the on-site jonin focused on Hinata. Everyone knew that Hinata was Naito's disciple because this matter was completely public, and also, due to this, no one dares to provoke the Hyuga clan. Perhaps even this lottery was deliberately done. It would be risky to let anyone else fight against Hinata, so they simply chose someone from the same clan, Hyuga Neji. Hinata, who came down to the field, noticed everyone's eyes locked on her, and she couldn't help but show hints of cowardice and weakness. Only a few people knew that Hinata's real strength doesn't match her weak personality. Naito, Kiba, Shino, Kuinai, Gaara. As for Neji, he wasn't one of them. Although he's from the same clan, he was 1 year older than Hinata. Secondly, Hinata was Naito's disciple, and he wasn't allowed to practice with her. When Naito comes to train her, he never dared to get close to them, fearing that he would displease Naito. Just right. Sure enough, his opponent was Hinata. Looking at the weak Hinata facing him, a hint of coldness appeared in Neji's eyes, with jealousy hidden in his heart's depth. His father, Hyuga Hisashi, currently runs the clan. The separation between the main and branch families didn't bother him much. He's not jealous of Hinata because he's from the branch family, but because she was chosen to be Naito's disciple. Hinata's character isn't suitable in his opinion as a ninja at all, nor to be the head of the Hyuga clan. Brother Neji. Hinata didn't know Neji's inner thoughts or his opinion about her. Still, she could feel that his gazes were a little harsher, even worse than those people around, which made it hard for her to look directly at him and ended up lowering her head. Gaara, in the stands, looked at the field silently. He was beaten by this seemingly weak girl. Others may be deceived by her appearance, but he is not. He knew how strong she is. The same is true for both Tomorai and Kankuro. Both of them witnessed what happened outside. This girl broke Gaara's absolute defense. Start. Hyatt looked at Hinata, and Neji then looked at Naito above and waved. Hinata-sama, I'm coming. Neji didn't say anything to Hinata, nor did he try to break her spirit with words as he did in the original. He couldn't do that, nor did he dare to do it, because Naito was watching them. He wants to defeat Hinata with his strength, and prove that he's the one who deserves to be recognized by Naito. Therefore, he first bowed his head to Hinata, then he took his gentle fist stance and suddenly rushed to Hinata. Hinata and Neji activated their Bakugan at the same time. Unlike Neji, Hinata's eyes were undoubtedly stronger, and his movement was clearly seen by her. With her strength, she could easily defeat Neji, but Hinata didn't do that. Instead, she passively defended against Neji's attacks. Although if she loses she fails the test, Hinata didn't want to kill Neji, even she could see in his eyes that he only wants to win. Therefore, she kept blocking his attack. But she couldn't help but think of Naito again, and with her ability of 360-degree angle of sight, she saw Naito smiling while sitting on the railing of the stands, and become serious. "I cannot disappoint Naito-sensei. I'm sorry, brother Neji." At that moment, Neji was pushing Hinata back, and he could notice that she had no power to fight back. She had no intention of counterattack, she was just passively defending herself, which made him feel sorry for her secretly. It seems that even with Master Naito's guidance, she is still weak. Soon, I will win. Thinking of this in his heart, Neji's eyes became sharp, and he increased the speed of his attack to quickly end the battle and defeat Hinata. Hinata and Neji were constantly waving their hands. Neji was ready to strike, but he suddenly caught a certain movement that Hinata did, and it was very familiar. This isn't good. Neji immediately fell back with no hesitation. Revolving Heaven. Unpredictable to Neji, Hinata really used the Revolving Heaven, but the range was much larger than what it should be, which was surprising. It seems that Hinata did learn a few things thanks to Naito-sama. Apart from being surprised, Neji felt more jealous. These things should be given to him. It is a waste to be given to Hinata, a person who isn't suitable for being a ninja. Standing out of Hinata's range, Neji waited for her to finish the rotation, planning to catch her off guard and rush quickly at her. However, a suddenly shocked expression appeared on his face. "What? No. This isn't a normal revolving heaven." Under his shocked gazes, Hinata didn't just stop the rotation, but with a strange move, the chakra around her suddenly gathered around. Chain attack. Under the combination of these two moves, Hinata gathered her chakra then shot it at Neji. The chakra flew toward him while continuously rotating and condensing. If this continues it will eventually become a sharp chakra spear. However, in the Chunin exam's small field, the distance was short for it to become a chakra spear, so it kept the sphere from which it flew toward Neji. Buzz. The horrible sense of her chakra's oppression alone terrified Neji, and with such a small distance, he couldn't just avoid it. So, in a panic, he could only use the revolving heaven. Boom! Hinata's chakra sphere bombarded Neji's revolving heaven and shattered it completely. Hinata's chakra was much stronger than Neji's, thus, the result of this collision was predictable. Neji fought back and tried hard to block the chakra sphere with a horrified expression on his face. He couldn't help but feel terrified as he couldn't resist it. Neji was shocked, he never thought that Hinata could use such a powerful move that even his revolving heaven couldn't block. Watching the revolving heaven getting shattered, and chakra sphere coming toward him, Neji felt a cold chill in his body. However, at the next moment, Hinata, in the distance, waved her small hand. It looked like a very simple move, but Hinata's expression was solemn. It's very difficult to control such a strong technique from such a distance. And she barely managed to shift its course at the very end. As a result, the chakra sphere hit Neji's hand, tore his sleeves, and injured him. Then just when it was about to reach his shoulder, it changed course and passed by him. Boom! A horrifying roar emitted as the chakra sphere bombarded the bottom of the stand, and almost instantly created a big hole on the wall. Hinata could only change the direction, and couldn't stop it from hitting the wall. To some people, it looked as if it was a Biju Udama. This chakra sphere didn't only destroy the wall, but even opened its way through it and flew to the outside of the tower, destroying the forest. The silence controlled the place. This move can be said to be the most powerful attack so far, and it was performed by the most looking weak contender, which was shocking enough. This kind of attack can shock even those who are regarded as elites. And I'm afraid only a few of them can stop it. I'm sorry. In this silence, Hinata lowered her head, then apologized softly, as if she was a child who did a wrong thing. At the same time, Hinata was even more embarrassed after what she did to Neji, who was standing there dizzyingly with an injured arm. Brother Neji, Neji didn't say anything. In fact, he wasn't even listening. He didn't even know how to walk back to the stand. He was still shocked. Although there was no serious injury, and he only had bruises, Hinata, who he has called weak, defeated him and even blasted the wall of the tower. And defeated his revolving heaven technique that he was so proud of. Good job. Naito stood up, then walked toward Hinata, watching how she was acting as if she has done something wrong. He couldn't help but smile, pat her small head, and took her back to the stands. It wasn't until Naito took Hinata back that people around the field came back to their senses. No one expected weak Hinata to be so strong. This kind of strength can only belong to a Jonin. Sure enough, no one related to Naito, and having the chance to get his guidance would be weak. Kakashi, Guy, Anko, Kimimaro, Haku, Karen, Hinata, even the weakest is as strong as a Jonin. The strongest was Guy, who could be on a par with a 6 paths level enemy when he opens the 8th gate. Countless people locked their eyes on Hinata, and couldn't help but feel that she was so lucky to be Naito's disciple. As for the 3rd Hokage, Sarutobi, he took a puff from his pipe with shocked traces in his eyes. In the next battles, Naito stopped paying attention. He was busy getting care of crying Hinata, who felt like she had troubled Naito by destroying the tower, and feared that he was angry with her. After trying for a while, he finally calmed her down. And at this moment, it was finally the last battle. Like the original, the last battle was a duel between Lee and Gaara. As in the original, Lee could open the 5th gate, and he was Guy's disciple. It took him 1 year to learn how to use the Hakemon Tonku and open the 5th gate. Exactly as Kakashi said, in a way, Lee was actually a genius. Naito has always appreciated Guy, and Lee's work rate, but their weird character. Boom! The roaring sound exploded in the field. After Lee opened the Hakemon Tonku, the power he possessed shocked everyone. The power it brought and the speed of his movement cracked the floor of the field. Hyuga Neji, who had been defeated by Hinata, didn't expect that from Lee, which Neji has ignored all the time. Lee's speed was almost beyond the limit that his eye could detect. He even has low odds against Lee now. Even Lee. Neji Hyuga clenched his fists tightly. If Hinata's strength was due to Naito, Lee's strength was achieved entirely by his efforts. What a pity. Naito, standing next to Hinata, looked at the field with a look of sympathy. If Lee didn't meet Gaara, he would have been able to defeat everyone else. It would have been more exciting, but unfortunately, Gaara was a tough kid. He didn't even use the power of the Ichibi yet. However, even though Lee was defeated, it was a glorious one. The will and determination he showed surprised everyone, and even the 3rd Hokage couldn't help widen his eyes. It seemed that he could see Konoha's will of fire burning in his eyes. The will of fire will not disappear. After murmuring these words, Sarutobi's face showed a touch of joy. Naito stood there quietly, watching the field. Hinata next to him, noticing that the last fight was over, looked at Naito weakly, then asked with a soft tone, "Naito-sensei, are you leaving? I have one more thing to do." After smiling at her, Naito disappeared out of thin air and flashed into the field below. He's barely breathing, his muscles are seriously damaged. It would be easy if that was only the case, but his left hand and left foot are hurt too much. The medical ninjas seemed to have a low expression. They have been on standby the entire time, and they were also shocked to see Lee's will, but his injury really made them helpless. Even the captain of the medical team seemed sad. Although it's frustrating to say this, I don't believe he can be a ninja any longer. After hearing this, Naruto and Guy on the side were shocked. How could this be? This is a lie. Naruto looked at Lee, who was about to be lifted away, as he was laying on the stretcher with his body slightly trembling. Naruto seemed in disbelief. The same is true for Guy, but he couldn't just let it go. He stepped forward, stopped the medical team, and then looked at the captain. Is that really the truth? Isn't there any way? The medical squad leader lowered his head and said, "With my medical skills, there's really nothing I can do. At least, in my opinion, there isn't any cure. It shouldn't end like this." Guy froze there. At that moment, a hand suddenly reached out from behind and patted his shoulder gently, then Naito walked in front of him. The medical ninjas carrying the stretcher widened their eyes the moment they saw him. They bowed their heads down and saluted him. "Naito-sama. You. Naito-sensei, can you help Lee?" Guy desperately grabbed the last straw as he was drowning in the depth of the ocean. Lee was indeed the most valued thing in his life. "Yes." Naito looked at Lee lying on the stretcher and nodded slightly. To be honest, even Naito recognized that will. However, Tsunade is the Aokage now, and it will be troublesome for her to come to Konoha and treat Lee, so he had no choice but to do it himself. After Naruto got the power of 6 paths, he could even save Guy's life after opening the gate of death, and today Naito can naturally do the same. Although Tsunade is recognized as the best medical ninja, Naito, on the other hand, can no longer be regarded as a ninja. He surpassed that concept, and his mien can no longer be described by the term medical ninjutsu. Naito didn't even let the medical squad put down the stretcher, but just randomly pointed at the center of Lee's eyebrows and injected some of his vitality directly into him. This process was very fast. He barely even touched his forehead before retracting his finger again. "How is it going?" Guy thought that Naito was diagnosing Lee's condition, and couldn't help but ask, fearing that he would hear the words that Lee cannot be cured. However, Naito didn't answer Guy. He turned around and stepped forward, while saying, "He is all right." When his voice emitted, Naito's figure disappeared again. Watching Naito leave like this, Guy froze in his place. "Naito-sensei. Wait, what? Why did the senior leave like this?" When Naruto watched Naito leaving, then looked at Lee lying on the stretcher, there didn't seem to be any special changes. Lee was still covered in dust and scars, which made him a little confused. Even the medical squad seemed a little weird. They looked at each other, thinking if it was possible that Naito took a look at Lee's injury and found out that he couldn't save him, so he left directly. At that moment, one of them suddenly thought of Naito's words, and how he said that he was all right. With great disbelief, he put his hand on Lee's body, then injected his chakra, and after sensing his situation, he stopped the chakra, then raised his head with an incredible expression on his face. "This." He was shocked to the point that he couldn't even finish his sentence. His other teammates looked at him strangely. Then they put the stretcher down and checked his body. This unusual situation invited a few more medical ninja into the scene. At this time, even Guy and Naruto reacted, revealing a look of excitement and disbelief. Could it be that? Both of them couldn't help but ask the medical ninjas. Although they were still a little shocked, looking at their expression, there's no way this isn't real. Is he all right? Hearing the eager question of Guy and Naruto, the leader calmed down, slowly took a deep breath, then turned to look at the two of them. As HolyOniiSama said, he's all right. He managed to squeeze this sentence out in a calm state, but even so, he couldn't restrain himself afterward as he was still shocked. In just a few moments, Lee's damaged muscles and bones from before were intact again, and there was no sign of injury. If he hadn't checked Lee's injury before, he would have believed that he was even injured. It was just a finger, a light touch at his forehead, that healed an injury that even the best medical ninjas in the village wouldn't be able to treat. This thing HolyOniiSama has done is simply amazing. Guy and Naruto heard the detailed explanation from the leader of the medical team, with shocked faces. Although they weren't medical ninja, they could feel how severe Lee's injury was. But for such an injury to completely heal an instant later by Naito, it was simply incredible. As expected of Naito-sensei, Guy said at that moment with a grateful look. He wanted to thank Naito, but he had already left. As for Naruto, looking at Lee, who got out of the coma and was sleeping peacefully, in awe, and seemed more respectful to Naito, and he gradually admired him. He's not only powerful, but even his medical technique is so good. Even though he has always wanted to become the Hokage, and be the strongest ninja, thinking of Naito at this moment, he couldn't help but feel hesitant. Facing a high mountain, no matter how high it is, you can only be confident that you will climb one day, but when you're facing an unreachable sky, that confidence will easily fade away. Even Naruto was in a trance for a long time before finally suppressing these feelings in his heart. Away from Konoha, in a small village. He was not in Konoha because Orochimaru's current state was bad, and it's impossible for him to go back to that any time soon. At this time, Orochimaru was lying there, with no signs of injury on the surface. However, the inside was scattered, and he could barely control his chakra. Naito's fist is not that simple to bear. Orochimaru was in pain. He has always watched Naito kill people with one punch. Heck, he defeated Baijua with one punch, and finally, experiencing it with his own body wasn't something he wished for. At the same time, he was a bit depressed. Kimimro's body was originally his to take, but he was robbed by Naito. And now he's not even allowed to study it. Orochimaru-sama, all the qualifiers have ended, and the official competition will start in 1 month. Kabuto came to the front of Orochimaru, first saluted him, then gave him the report. Orochimaru hummed and continued to sit there without saying a word. Looking at Orochimaru, Kabuto's eyes seemed suddenly sharp, and he asked tentatively, "Orochimaru-sama, how is your body?" "What do you mean?" This time, Orochimaru locked his eyes on Kabuto. At first it was a bit of fierceness that was revealed in his eyes, then they seemed more like the eyes of a snake that can see through everything. Kabuto was startled but still said, "I feel that your chakra is really unsettled. Perhaps Naito-sama's punch didn't not only destroy your inner organs but also affected your soul." Humph. Listening to Kabuto's analysis, Orochimaru smiled evilly with a trace of coldness, saying, "So, are you gonna try your luck now?" As soon as these words came out, the surrounding atmosphere seemed to be heavier, and Orochimaru's momentum gradually started to crush Kabuto. "How come? I will never think of that." There was a trace of cold sweat on Kabuto's forehead as he said, "I just want to help you, Orochimaru-sama, This is why I'm trying to analyze the problem, and think about a solution. You don't have to trouble yourself. I will recover in 1 month. No, half a month will be enough, this won't affect the plan. Orochimaru stared coldly at Kabuto, then faintly said, even if it's difficult for me to gather chakra now, you can't kill me, even though you're also so strong yourself. Sweating all over his body, Kabuto bowed his head. Get lost now. Orochimaru raised his head, then Kabuto walked out obediently. This guy. Looking at the back of Kabuto, strange colors flashed in Orochimaru's eyes. He always felt that something was wrong with Kabuto, but he couldn't tell what was going on. According to his personality, it's quite normal, but Orochimaru couldn't shake that feeling. At some point, Kabuto seemed a little different than before. Humph. Thinking of this, Orochimaru smirked. The night fell. Most of the ninja qualifiers were over. Of course, it would have been quicker if all of them won easily like Kimimaro and Karen. After the pre-selection of the third and final test of the Chunin exam, the official third exam will start, and there will be a month of preparation time. During this period, celebrities from all over the world will come, including the Kazekage of the Sand Village. Naito didn't stay in Konoha and returned to the Rain Village. Kimimaro and the others didn't need him to take care of anything after all. And he also needed to focus more on the final transformation of his soul. When he was absorbing the power of the Rinnegan, he could feel that his soul getting bigger and stronger, but now it's shrinking or compressing, changing from quantity to quality. In Konoha, as the sky was getting darker, there was no movement at all, only some ninjas patrolling and walking around. In this dark night, a figure was kneeling in the Uchiha clan's ancestral hall, gritting his teeth and hammering the ground with his fists. Why am I the weakest? Uchiha Sasuke's fist was dripping with blood, but he didn't realize it. He was just clenching his teeth while thinking of his brother, Itachi. At this moment, a dark shadow suddenly emerged from the corner of the hall. Do you desire power? Uchiha Sasuke. Who is there? Sasuke was shocked, and stood up quickly, then opened his Sharingan eyes and looked at the back cautiously, but he found nothing. If you really want strength, then come with me. The voice seemed to have hints of hoarseness. Sasuke located the source of the sound and chased it out. It wasn't until the next day that Konoha discovered that Uchiha Sasuke was missing. No one knew where he went. Even after Orochimaru knew this, he was a little surprised. He was still injured, and he couldn't be there in Konoha during this time, thus, Sasuke's sudden disappearance shocked him. However, Sasuke's disappearance was just a small wave. Except for a few people who really cared about him, his disappearance didn't even set off any disturbing in Konoha. So, are you going to Konoha again in a month? In a quiet room, Tsunade was sitting facing Naito drinking tea while Kushina sat down in the middle smiling, after bringing a plate of snacks on the table. It was just a daily chat. Naito's building is the tallest one in the Rain Village, and the top floor is where he and the others live. Most people can't talk to him casually. Kushina and most of the others live on the same floor, and Tsunade often visits them. Well, it has nothing to do with me. Naito smiled, looking at Tsunade. If you don't want to go to Konoha, no one will dare to force you to go. It doesn't matter if I go. The Kazekage of the Sand will go to Konoha personally, and the sixth major village, the Rain Village, is also invited. Naito was the first Ankage, and Tsunade is the second. One of them will have to go. If Naito doesn't go, Tsunade won't be able to reject the invitation, but she doesn't really want to go to Konoha. Yes. Tsunade shook her head, that's it. Whether you go or not, I won't go. Naito ate the cookie that Kushina put in his mouth, then the look on his face changed, saying, however, if you don't go this time, you might lose the opportunity to see some people for the last time. What? Tsunade suddenly looked sensitive, then she immediately stood up and said, could it be that? Well, the only thing I can say is that it won't be any other day Chunin exam. The third Hokage is already very old. Naito decided to share what he knew. After learning about Orochimaru's plan from Naito, Tsunade was silent and pondered for a long time, but finally chose not to go to Konoha, regardless of this. She had said that she won't care about Konoha anymore at that time, not to mention that the person who was going to make trouble this time was her former companion Orochimaru. After becoming the Hokage, Tsunade could understand many of Sarutabi's thoughts, but never approved what he did. 1 month passed quickly. The third official test of Konoha's joint Chunin exam finally started as scheduled. One after another, celebrities and elites from all over the world gathered in Konoha, sitting on the stands of the huge Colosseum. With such a huge field, surrounded by vast stands, it was difficult for any attack to reach the crowds. Moreover, even if a shuriken, a kunai, or some ninjutsu crossed such a high stand and reached the audience, it will be stopped by the Anbu, using their ceiling barriers. Of course, this barrier isn't powerful. The 4 purple flames formation that can trap a Hokage-level shinobi is just a relatively ordinary barrier. Although it was kind of weak, it was still more than enough to block general attacks. However, most of the ninjas who are participating in this exam today would not use general attacks. Be patient, no matter what the situation is, do not take the initiative to attack. If the Ichibi breaks the seal, the 3 of us will stop him. These are Naito-sama's orders. The candidates of the Chunin exam entered the hall, and Kimimaro, who was on the side, reminded Karen and Haku of Naito's orders a month ago. Understood. Karen nodded, looked around, and after sensing her surroundings, she suddenly revealed a thoughtful look. The match selection was made a month ago, and the first match was Kimimaro vs. Gaara. Sarutabi had already arrived here early, smiling and looking at the stands and the field below, and at the same time carefully observing the Colosseum. He wanted to know if Naito had come. However, after searching carefully for a while, he didn't find him. He didn't come. Sarutabi felt strange. In the previous test, he was here, but he didn't show up when it came to the finals. Sarutabi had even reserved a place for him. In the honorary podium, there were 3 seats, 1 for him, 1 prepared for the Hokage, and the last was for Naito, but he didn't show up yet. Just as Sarutabi was pondering, the Hokage wearing his hat finally came. He seemed very calm, with no special momentum coming out of his body, just a kind of dignity. Oh, welcome, Hokage-sama. Sarutabi saw him approaching, so he smiled and gave him a friendly greeting. The Hokage was naturally Orochimaru. The real one has been killed by him halfway, with Orochimaru recovering from his injuries half a month ago. Orochimaru's body was enhanced by Hashirama's cells, so he had an extremely strong healing ability. Coupled with his special ninjutsu, it was difficult for an ordinary shinobi to hurt him, and even if his body gets damaged, he can quickly recover. But Naito's punch wasn't just a purely physical attack. It can even damage the soul, and this is why it took him half a month to recover. But it was just in time to kill the Hokage. Orochimaru, who disguised as the Hokage, sat down on the chair without saying a word, and at the same time, glanced slightly at the third chair. It wasn't difficult to guess that this chair was prepared for Naito, but it seems like he didn't show up. It should have been a long journey, sorry for troubling you. Sarutobi smiled at the Kazekage. Orochimaru was smirking under the disguise, but on the outside, he seemed as calm as ever, then said, well, I should be saying that it was the right choice to hold the exam here since I'm still young to travel. It would have been much overwhelming to ask an old man like you to travel all the way to the sand. It's better if you start thinking of a fifth Hokage, HolyOniiSama. It was clear that the Kazekage was making fun of his age. But Sarutobi didn't really give it much thought since the Kazekage was really young and inexperienced. He just smiled and said, oh, don't you say that to me, I still want to do it for a few more years. With that, Sarutobi stood up, walked to the forefront, then announced the beginning of the exam. Orochimaru, sitting in the Kazekage's seat, looked down. Although his plan to destroy Konoha was about to begin, he didn't mind watching some interesting battles. So Kimimaro is fighting Gaara. This is going to be an interesting duel. Orochimaru watched the field with interest, and at the same time, following Sarutobi's announcement, the examiner Hayate finally announced the first battle. First round, Gaara vs. Kimimaro. Please walk forward to the center of the field. Looking at Gaara ahead, Kimimaro finally smiled faintly. Gaara was picked against him, this time he will finally have the chance to play. Kaguya Kimimaro, and Gaara of the Sand, there's quite a suspense about this battle outcome. The third Hokage looked at the field but seemed to be a bit worried. If the Ichibi rampages again, it won't be a trivial matter. The barrier enchantment won't be enough to block his attacks. The Sand really picked a troublesome squad to take the Chunin exam. It gave Sarutobi a headache, but he didn't say anything about it. Because the same can be said about Konoha's Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Uzumaki Naruto, who's participating in the Chunin exam. Gaara, who defeated Lee, seemed much calmer after meeting Kimimaro again. With a sign from the examiner, the battle between the two broke out. 10-finger drilling bullets. As soon as the fight started, Kimimaro used again the same technique that injured Gaara before, then he stood up watching Gaara. However, this time Gaara was prepared, using the sand mixed with hard metal. He created a wall that could block the bone bullets. The same attack won't work twice on me. Gaara, who was folding his arms against his chest, and standing there calmly, suddenly loosened his arm and quickly pressed his hands down. Whoosh! Instantly, the sand under Kimimaro's feet sank, and tightly wrapped his legs, preventing him from moving. Then he quickly got dragged to the ground. Sand binding coffin. The killing intent was evident in his eyes, with a sense of creepy excitement. Pressing both hands, while mobilizing his chakra, the entire Colosseum started trembling, as the center of the field gradually collapsed a few feet. This scene made the celebrities and the elites from all over the world extremely shocked. This terrible power, is that kid just a genin? Are you kidding me? However, this should be already over. Looking at the ground that had sunk a few feet below, everyone couldn't help but swallow. Kimimaro, who was getting crushed by the ground, in their view, should already be a meatloaf by now. However, at the moment, this thought was crossing their minds, a clear voice emitted from the ground. Dance of the seedling fern. Whoosh! 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 Instantly, the ground cracked from the center of the field, then huge bones penetrated it and pierced upwards, rushing fiercely toward Gaara. Watching this scene, Gaara also looked shocked, and without hesitation, he controlled the sand under his feet to fly upward. Although this Colosseum field was huge, under an attack of such a level, there was no place to hide but the sky. Whoosh! 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 This terrifying attack instantly turned the entire field into a forest of bones, and almost broke the barrier set up by the Anbu around the stands, scaring them into a cold sweat. Even the Anbu were shocked, not to mention the celebrities and elites of various lands that almost every single one of them was scared to death. Gaara flew quickly to the top of the bone forest, standing on a cloud of sand and looking down with vigilante. But in the next moment, a cold voice came behind him. It's over. Shit. Gaara secretly cursed in his heart, and he only had time to reluctantly turn sideways. The bone penetrated his right chest, covering even his shoulder. Damn you. Gaara was clearly in great pain. This was the third time he gets injured. He has never seen his blood before coming to Konoha, but this time the pain was even more than before. Kimimro's lower body was completely attached to the towering bone, and his arm was taking the shape of a long spear that was penetrating Gaara's chest. The blood flowed down. The audience was in silence. This level of battle is simply not something that a genin can display. Well, it's almost time to start. Noticing how everyone was staring at the sky in shock, a ninja hiding in the crowd suddenly performed a hand sign with both hands. Genjutsu, Temple of Nirvana technique. Quietly, countless feathers fell from the sky, and those who were focusing on the battle fell asleep in a drowsy manner. At the same time, the sound and the sand shinobi hidden in Konoha launched a surprise attack. The plan of destroying Konoha began. Do you only have this ability? Kimimro didn't care about everything happening below, watching the sand and the sound shinobi confronting Konoha's shinobi. He had a faint look in his eyes. It turned out that Master Naito was talking about this. You piece. Damn it. Gaara was trembling as dense blood traces appeared in his eyes, then he suddenly stretched out his hand at Kimimro. What's strange is that his waving hand suddenly turned into a terrifying claw. Humph. Kimimro pulled the bone spear out of Gaara's body while snorting coldly, then he struck down the claws fiercely, with no fear. Is this the power of the Ichibi? Gaara's body was trembling, and he seemed like he was losing it, but the Ichibi didn't come out, nor did he try to control his body. Although he's an idiot, he wasn't mindless. It hasn't been long since he met Naito, and he was still in the same village, so he wasn't stupid enough to come out. If he doesn't come out, Gaara can take control of his chakra to make partial tails, but the size wasn't comparable. Because he had taken control of the Ichibi's chakra, Gaara's wounds healed, and he had the chance to fight again with Kimimro for a while, but he was still defeated. Perhaps a full body can suppress Kimimro, but Gaara alone can't do anything to him. Finally, it started. No one noticed that Naito had already come and sat on the top of the Colosseum. At this time, the Orochimaru, who was pretending to be the Kazekage, had also driven Sarutobi to the roof, and the Anbu cast the 4 violet flame formation, to keep him inside. Kazekage or not, we should avoid using force and talk to solve this problem. It's not too late for that. Ha ha ha, have you become demented as you got older? Hiruzen sensei. You. The moment he heard these words, Sarutobi shouted. If the sand decided to attack Konoha, and the Kazekage is standing her, things would have been better. But if Orochimaru is the one standing in front of him, then things have obviously gone from bad to worse. It turned out to be this, I understand. Sarutobi finally understood why Orochimaru appeared during the exam before. It wasn't just for Sasuke, the last descendant of the Uchiha clan, but at the same time, he wanted to unite with the Sand to attack Konoha. Watching the chaotic situation below, the Sand and the Sound Shinobi have already started attacking Konoha's Shinobi. Everything was going on as he arranged, even the huge snakes broke into the village under countless horrified gazes of the civilians. Seeing all of this made Orochimaru's body tremble slightly. His expression was very strange, and he seemed to have watering eyes. No one knew what Orochimaru was thinking at that moment. Are you so happy, or maybe just sad that? Whoosh! With kunai he was holding in his hand, Orochimaru cut his palm, and the blood splashed the ground. Then he wiped away the tears from the corner of his eyes. No, I'm just feeling sleepy. Anyway, Hiruzen-sensei, this is going to be the end. Most of the people were at a loss for what to do with this sudden chaotic event. While Kimimaro was fighting Gaara, the two kept using one big move after another, until they left the Colosseum, fell into the village, and continued to fight. Gaara was releasing more chakra, and gradually he was close to completing the Baijua transformation. Haku and Karen looked at each other, then they followed. Until this moment, no one noticed that Naito was standing at the top. Looking at the messy Konoha, Naito had an inexplicable look on his face, his eyes looked sharp, then he stepped down and sat on the third chair in the honorary podium Saruto be prepared for him. But at that time, the other two were already empty. Sitting there, Masahiko casually looked at the field, where Kakashi and Gain were fighting the Sand and the Sound, and suddenly thought, if Sarutobi is killed, perhaps the fifth Hokage will be Kakashi. Obviously, Jiraiya wouldn't accept the position and exclude him, maybe Narashikaku is the best candidate. Suddenly Naito found out that Sasuke was missing. Interesting, Sasuke isn't in Konoha anymore. Although looking down at the field, and using his ultra perceive that could cover the entire village, he didn't find Sasuke. At the time, another thing that made Naito feel strange was that Kabuto wasn't here either. Both Kabuto and Sasuke are gone. Well, this is really interesting. As Orochimaru's subordinate, he should be here at this time. In a moment, Naito thought of many things, and a ray of light flashed in his eyes. Whoosh! Suddenly, Naito flashed and disappeared from the seat. A roof in Konoha. The four violet flame formation was set up here. On the outside it was the Anbu of Konoha, with their captain leading them, but the look in his eyes seemed worried. This is big trouble, we can't go through this barrier. This four violet flame formation could even trap the Hokage. These Anbu had nothing to do about it. Unless the four sound shinobi run out of chakra, this enchantment will stay there. However, just when he thought of that, a figure wearing a white cloak flicker appeared in front of the barrier and then stepped directly into it. No, don't. Noticing this, the Anbu couldn't help but exclaim. Just a moment ago, one of his companions tried to run through it and got burned into ashes. The four sound shinobi who set up this barrier saw him and couldn't help but reveal a touch of mockery as if they knew what was going to happen next. But a second later, the smirks and grins on their faces stagnated, revealing a shocked expression. Because when that person stepped inside, nothing happened, the man just walked inside. The Anbu was shocked, and then they finally recognized that it was Naito, and couldn't help but feel excited. Yes, Naito-sama. They knew that it was almost impossible for anyone else to pass that barrier, but if it's Naito, then it's normal. In the eyes of a lot of people, Naito's existence is even above the Hokage. As for the four sound shinobi, who didn't know Naito, they all were left dumbfounded. This technique was taught to them by Orochimaru, and he explained that no one would be able to pass through it, even him. If Naito shattered it then walked in, although it would shock them, it would be better than watching him walking in casually. However, it wasn't that casual. When Naito crossed the barrier, they would feel a strong aura, beyond the limits of the four violet flame formation. There is simply a qualitative gap between the barrier and Naito's body. Who is this guy? The four sound shinobi had a drop of cold sweat on their forehead while staring at Naito stubbornly. However, they didn't dare to move at all or even say a word. They were all shocked by Naito's aura, and they could hardly move. Inside the barriers, their third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, who was fighting Orochimaru, saw Naito walking it, but didn't look happy, and revealed a touch of complexity. You Naito. When Orochimaru launched this attack on Konoha, he knew that Naito would definitely not care about this matter, and he even estimated that he knew about it a long time ago. Orochimaru may be able to do a lot of things under his nose, but it's absolutely impossible for him to do anything without informing Naito. Hey, is it possible that Naito-san is also interested in Sarutobi-sensei's head? Do you want to do it yourself? Orochimaru looked at Naito, who walked into the four violet flame formation, revealing an evil look. No, you can have him, I just came here to ask something. Naito shook his head, then asked casually, when did Uchiha Sasuke disappear? Do you know where he went? About a month ago, and I don't know where Sasuke went. Orochimaru answered, then the corner of his mouth raised slightly, and he gestured to Sarutobi on the side. You better ask Sarutobi-sensei, maybe he know more. I don't know either. Sarutobi shook his head and said, Sasuke disappeared all of a sudden. I thought it was you, Orochimaru, then one who took him. Now it seems that it's the work of someone else. Hearing the answers of Sarutobi and Orochimaru, Naito pondered, then looked at Orochimaru and asked, then do you know where Kabuto went? This question made Orochimaru look slightly strange. If Naito cares about Sasuke, it is still within the normal range, but if he cares about his subordinate, it's kind of strange. Moreover, indeed something very strange happened to Kabuto. No, he disappeared a few days ago. Orochimaru shook his head, then a look of interest suddenly appeared in his eyes, and said, it seems that something is going on here, and Naito, you seem to know something. I have a guess. Naito shook his head, then shrugged with a lazy expression. If they don't know anything about it, then it's probably Black Zetsu. Okay, you can continue. After finishing what he came for, Naito took a few steps, then once again walked out of the four violet flame formation, and instantly disappeared. Naito's sudden arrival and disappearing, left even Orochimaru and Sarutobi puzzled. And both looked in the direction where he left silently. After a few moments, Orochimaru turned to look at Sarutobi, and said, so where have we been, Hiruzen-sensei? Orochimaru's tone was dark and cold, but Sarutobi seemed unmoved by it. Crack! The next moment, their chakra burst out, and their auras started raising and colliding with each other, creating waves and leaving signs of fragmentation on the roof. Immediately afterward, the two started moving their hands almost simultaneously, while rushing at each other. At this time, Naito had already arrived at a ruin in Konoha. This was the Uchiha's ancestral hall, and this was also where the stone tablet was hanging. Sure enough, you've taken the chance to come here when I wasn't in Konoha. Of course, only an eternal Sharingan can read the entire writing on the stone tablet. Even though Naito didn't have any dojutsu, he had the 6 paths power, which allowed him to read the stone too. Rubbish. After reading the tablet stone, Naito shook his head, then walked out of the ancestral hall. The moment he took a step out, a crack suddenly appeared in the middle of the table, then it instantly spread, and finally, the whole tablet stone got destroyed. The battle between Orochimaru and Sarutobi surprised Naito a bit because Orochimaru didn't use the Edo Tensei, but was confronting Sarutobi head-on. After using the power of the Mangekyo Sharingan, the old Sarutobi was no longer Orochimaru's opponent. However, this is where Orochimaru has made a mistake. If he didn't trap himself and Sarutobi inside the 4 violet flame formation, he would have finished him easily. And he wouldn't have given Sarutobi the chance to use the Shiki Fuijin. The last time I saw this technique, I couldn't feel this. Looking at the god of death who was summoned by Sarutobi, Naito pondered. The Grim Reaper, which is summoned by this technique, looks very similar to the Otsutsuki clansman. And the most person he seemed really similar to him is undoubtedly Otsutsuki Kaguya. Last time, when Minato used the Shiki Fuijin to seal half of the Kyuubi into his body, Naito didn't feel any consciousness in it. But turned out that Kaguya's will was also inside Shiki as if it was moving him. However, it was weak, and it was still not enough to revive Kaguya. Yet, just when Sarutobi tried to use the technique to seal Orochimaru, a sudden change occurred. As if some kind of power surged in it, the god of death who couldn't be seen by the naked eye suddenly moved away from Sarutobi and Orochimaru, and turned to look far away, where Naito was standing in the distance. Although ordinary people couldn't see him, Naito could clearly. Therefore, Naito stared at him too, and their eyes connected. Suddenly, a wave of spiritual power surged like a whirlpool came crashing towards Naito. Although Shiki was only a small part of Kaguya's will, he could still feel threatened by Naito's existence, so he instinctively attacked him. Interesting. Facing this mental shock, Naito seemed astonished, and with a cold stare, a spiritual shock burst out. Boom! The terrifying collision of both spiritual shocks made it spread in all directions, making almost everyone else feel dizzy. Except for Orochimaru and Sarutobi, whose souls have been connected to the Shiki due to the ninjutsu, this terrifying spiritual shock almost hit everyone in Konoha. Although this was just the wave created from the collusion of Naito and Kaguya's wills, it wasn't something ordinary shinobi could withstand. The 4 violet flame formation was dissipated instantly, as the 4 sound shinobi faint out. Immediately after that, people outside of the barriers started falling one after another. Puff! Puff! Inside the village, people started falling like pieces of wheat, and there were no exceptions, no matter whether it was civilians, Chunin, or even Jonin. Getting hit by this spiritual shock wave, no one could stay conscious. Only a few kid-level powerhouses, such as Kakashi, Guy, Kimimaro, and the other, didn't pass out directly but were shocked badly and barely conscious. What is going on? Kakashi and Guy, who were fighting the sand and the sound, suddenly have almost fainted out, but they barely managed to withstand it. However, the shinobis facing them were already lying on the ground. After the two looked at each other, they quickly jumped to a high place and glanced at Konoha. It was even shocking to find out that almost every single life inside the village dropped on the ground. Only a few people, including them, didn't pass out directly. The most conspicuous people were Sarutobi and Orochimaru, standing still in a strange way. Not far away, they could see Naito floating in the air, but it seemed that space was rippling around him. Is that Naito-sensei? What is he doing? Kakashi's expression seemed serious as he was looking at Naito, as well as Orochimaru and Sarutobi in the distance. Konoha, far away. Kimimaro, who was finished fighting Gaara and winning, looked a bit pale. They didn't participate in the battle, but Haku and Karen also seemed tired. As for Gaara, he fainted out, and the sand that was on his body instantly scattered and fell to the ground. Kimimaro and Haku didn't pay attention to Gaara, who passed away. Instead, they all seemed shocked, looking behind at the village. This is. Using her powerful perceptual ability, Karen sensed Naito's vast chakra. Immediately afterward, she sensed Guy and Kakashi, but she ignored them and focused her perception on Sarutobi and Orochimaru. With her special perception ability, she can barely perceive the god of death summoned by the Shiki Fijuin technique, but this was her limit. She cannot perceive Kaguya's will that was moving him. HolyOniiSama. Karen was frowning and seemed uncertain of the situation. Since Naito suddenly showed his power, there must be a reason behind that. It's very likely that there are enemies that even she can't perceive. Since she couldn't even perceive it, it was obviously impossible to help Naito at all, so she could only watch from the sidelines. However, in her opinion, Naito is absolutely invincible. No matter who's there facing him, it would be impossible to be his opponent. In the field, Orochimaru and Sarutobi also were shocked, but neither of them turned his head. They were only looking into the distance from the corner of the eye. Both of them were connected directly to the Reaper, thus, none of them were affected by this spiritual shock. However, they can feel as if two auras, terrifying to the extreme, fighting each other. Under the pressure they felt from these two horrible auras, both Orochimaru and Sarutobi felt extremely infinitesimal. "Old man, what did you do?" With cold sweat flowing over his forehead, Orochimaru asked. Sarutobi was also confused. He didn't understand why the Reaper would take the initiative to attack Naito all of a sudden. Now he seems like he's even losing control. Just as he was getting more confused and puzzled, the Reaper, or to be more accurate Kaguya's will, launched another attack on Naito. "Get lost." Naito coldly looked at the Reaper in the distance. With that momentum, only the surrounding building could no longer bear the pressure and collapsed all at once. Even the ground under him cracked and shattered, even though he was floating in the sky. At the same time, a burst of power burst out, trembling the void. Although Kaguya's will was still undestroyable, this was only a small part, and it was nothing compared to Naito's newborn powers. With that, another wave of spiritual shock rippled through toward the Reaper. Kakashi, Guy, as well as Kimimaro and his friends, who were getting close, once again were hit and stopped moving. With every hit, they seemed to be losing power, and some of them seemed barely standing. At this time, although they couldn't see anything with their eyes, Kakashi, Karen, and the others already knew that the battle was taking place here. However, who was fighting Naito? Orochimaru? No, that can't, because no matter how you look at it, it's not right. This time when Naito countered the Reaper's attack, it seemed that Kaguya's will had also been damaged. It felt as if it was scattered between the dimensions. Then suddenly it was gathering around, and being poured inside the Reaper, as if she was getting resurrected. This time, even the other could feel that something was wrong, as if there was a terrifying power gathering around Orochimaru and Sarutobi. However, this power didn't belong to any of them. It was far more terrifying than something a human being could possess. What is this? Sarutobi and Orochimaru, who have now fully lost control of the situation, and had their souls connected to the summoned Reaper, could clearly perceive that terrifying power better than Karen and Kakashi. The traces of the cold sweat was filling their foreheads, because whether it was Orochimaru or Sarutobi, both could feel a horrifying aura behind that power. Especially Orochimaru, whose soul was about to get devoured by the Reaper. Kaguya's will was actively gathering, and there were signs of recovery, which made Naito a little surprised. Naito finally looked fiercely, yet also coldly at the Reaper floating in the sky. Now is not time for you to come out. At this time, the power of the Six Paths burst out of Naito's body, and the Six Paths sage symbol pattern appeared on his clothes and turned into a chakra cloak. With a sharp look from his eyes, the spiritual shock converged into a single line, then instantly crossed the distance between him and the Reaper, and directly bombarded him. In other words, directly bombarded Kaguya's will that seemed to be resurrecting. At this moment, the world seemed to have been instantly replaced by a dazzling white light, as if the world that everyone knew had collapsed. In the struggle, Kaguya, who seemed to be gathering her will to resurrect, suddenly stagnated for a moment, then shattered. Crack! Together with the Reaper that Sarutobi summoned, all of them shattered and entirely dissipated between the sky and earth. At this time, the aftermath of this terrifying spiritual shock reflected in all directions, and everyone except Orochimaru and Sarutobi was affected. This time, even Kakashi, Guy, and the other couldn't withstand it, and they all fell to the ground. Kimimaro, Karen, and Haku were slightly in a better condition, but they couldn't stand too, even though they didn't faint out. In Konoha, no one else was standing except for Naito, Sarutobi, and Orochimaru. But that doesn't mean that Orochimaru and Sarutobi weren't affected. As a matter of fact, they were the most damaged. The Reaper that Naito has just destroyed was connected to Sarutobi, thus he was the most affected. For a moment, Sarutobi's eyes seemed dim, spouted blood, then he fell on his back. And Orochimaru, who was being caught by Sarutobi's soul, had part of his soul directly scattered by the spiritual shock wave. At the moment of the impact, Orochimaru had to make a critical decision: either he gave up that part of his soul, or hang to it and get entirely destroyed. Thus, he completely cut off that part. Damn. His soul was damaged, and the pain was extremely serious. Although Orochimaru has turned pale, he was still conscious. If he didn't also practice the art of soul, he would also faint out by this time. In the very last breaths of Sarutobi, he recalled the scene where Orochimaru's soul got scattered, and a deep smile was raised at the corner of his mouth, then he finally passed away. That's it for this video, guy. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.